All right. Hi, everyone, again. Okay, so as people come in, I'll just do a quick introduction here and then we'll pass it over to the RBCx to get into the reason you're really here. So first, welcome. We're here to talk about perfecting your fundraising deck. But before that, I always like to say New Ventures BC is a nonprofit, so we like to go through our sponsors and just tell you about some upcoming events. But first, most importantly, just want to acknowledge that we are situated on the traditional ancestral unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. And here our office is in downtown Vancouver, so that includes the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and we're very grateful. Our sponsors for this year, Innovate BC is our lead sponsor. Gold sponsors are EY, National Bank, and Fasken. Silver sponsors are Vantech, Talkshop Media, Razor CFO, SFUPD School of Business, and of course RBCx. We're doing this event with them, of course, and we also have another event coming up with RBCx as well, and UBC Sauder School of Business, of course. And we have lots of great bronze sponsors who are part of the community to support startup founders as well. So in terms of some upcoming events, I just wanted to flag with you in case any of our interests. We have next Tuesday, so this will be in person and online. It's a half-day event on intellectual property for business growth. So this will be some education, some panels, and some networking with some great speakers around this topic. So we just confirmed a former IP manager from Xerox is coming down from San Francisco for this event as well. So some new perspectives as well. So if you're interested in this, maybe I'll ask Clara, who's here, to just put a link to our events page. You're welcome to sign up for that. Next week also is our last kind of official topic for our competition series, which is around non-dilutive funding in the form of MyTex. So if you want to learn more about the MyTex program, please join us for that. Otherwise, soon you'll hear from RBCx again, because they are our excellent host for our round 3 networking event. So that will be July 2nd. Again, registration is open if you want to come join and do some networking. And looking ahead, we have a couple events happening in July. So one thing we have been told in the many years of doing this competition is financials are often considered a weakness when it comes to our own application process and submission. So we try to add in some extra workshops around this topic. So Peter Dorsman from Angel Forum, he does a great talk and really digs into the details around financials and what typically both investors and also the new ventures judges are often looking for. So that'll happen in July. And for the fun part, if you happen to be a golfer, we also golf. So this is really just for fun. We have usually a mix of some founders, a lot of our mentors, and some sponsors come out. It's usually a small group, so it's not like those big crazy tournaments, 25 to 30 people. There's dinner after, and it's fun. So if you're kind of a golfer, that's totally fun. We play best ball, so please come on out. And yeah, I think we've been doing this for 12 years, 10 years. Every year I say, I'm golfing next year. I'm golfing next year. This year I actually am golfing. So if you want to be on the worst team, you can join my team. So anyways, details for that are on the website as well. Otherwise, to today's event, so we're super lucky to have Laith Shukri. He's the Director of Ecosystem Engagement at RBCx. He's given this talk a couple times already, and I find this one interesting because it's really giving you the kind of the perspective of an investor and the things that maybe you don't always think about, because there's a lot of different ways to look at how to do a good pitch. So I always appreciate the perspective that this talk gives, and I hope you do too. So we'll have Laith go through the session, talk, and then we'll open it up for Q&A afterwards. And that's it for me. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can pass it over to Laith to get going. So thanks again.
Yep, so just unmuting myself and just making sure that everyone can see the screen. If I can get like a thumbs up or, okay, cool. Yep. All right, awesome, thumbs up, there it is. There's everything, just closing up any sort of like pop-ups as well. All right, Angie, thank you so much. And New Ventures BC, thank you so much for having me again. Valen, thank you for helping set this up too. So big shout out there to everyone sort of involved in this. So my name is Laith. I am the Director of Ecosystem Engagement over at RBCx. We'll be going over sort of building and sort of how do you perfect your fundraising deck, or basically how to position yourself in front of investors when you're trying to raise. As we know, raising capital is one of the more significant, I guess, like processes or events that tend to happen for technology companies. So before we get started, I'll talk a little bit about RBCx. I'll talk about like who, what we are, etc. So let me just see if it switches over. No, it does not. There we go. Okay, so there we go. We're basically the tech practice within RBC, built from the ground up to serve, scale, and act as the growth partners for tech companies, technology innovation companies, so startups, all over Canada. So we're not really, focused on a super small niche or anything. Like we really do want to be like, we do really want to be your champions, your growth partners. We want to be seen as your support systems, and we want to support you in any way, sort of, in any way we can along that journey, whether it means, capital, whether it means advising, whether it means bringing you over as a client, whether it means bringing you alongside us, to some of the more exclusive events, doing some advisory stuff, some mentoring stuff, some coaching stuff, hiring, all that sort of stuff. Literally anything that we can actually do to help you move from A to B and make that as seamless and as painless as possible. That's what we aim to be at the end of the day, is be impactful, be meaningful, and be valuable at the end of it. So it really talks about our value, right? So we're very much client first. Everything, I tell this to the early stage team, like everything should be built around the founder. And if it doesn't really make sense, we need to take it apart and understand like why it's not working the way, why it's not working as intended, and how do we make it better. We aim to always be very, collaborative. We always aim to be accountable as well. So if we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, call us out. If I'm not helping you, call me out. We also aim to be, a very diverse and very inclusive team. And then we very much value integrity in the way we act, the way we speak, and the way we hold ourselves, and the standards that we actually hold ourselves to as well. Couple quick stats just on the slide. We're pretty much all over Canada. We are not just a bank. We are many things. Yes, we have banking clients, so you can kind of see that the first sort of like figure 3,500. But we're also an LP. So we're actually invested in a few VC funds in Canada. Some of the top performing funds. We are a limited partner, and we are super proud of that. Super proud to be working with some of the best VCs in the country as they grow and invest in more companies across the nation. We're in many locations. So you've got, from early stage banking, you've got Valen on the call as well. So he represents us in BC. But then we've got tons and tons of other people that are, that can't wait to help tech companies grow all across the country. And I think that's kind of what I wanted to take over in the slide. We're made up of 4 different pillars, right? So we do have banking, right? It's the banking suite. Doesn't really need an introduction. Banking services, solutions, products, etc. But then there's also the capital side, which I just kind of touched upon, where we do like some strategic investments, but then we're also an LP. We're also, helping VC funds scale and grow as well, just as we do with our clients, because we count them as clients too. With ventures, we do have a small portfolio of companies that we, in the past, have grown, but now are acquiring. But that's a whole different conversation for a whole different other time. And then the more interesting one, in my opinion, but I'm a little bit biased because I'm kind of part of that team, is platform. And it's the agency. I refer to it usually as like an agency model, kind of. Platform was kind of built on the basis, or took inspiration from those tier 1 VCs that are in Silicon Valley. So you've got, your Sequoias and your Andreessens and your Google Ventures and your Kleiner Perkins and, all that sort of stuff. Each one of those funds has a platform team set up within that fund. And that whole team's job, as they get up in the morning, they put their clothes on and they get ready for work, is to help support the portfolio in any way. Whether it means helping you hire someone, helping you with a pivot, helping you do market research, helping do a little bit of consultation around maybe UI, UX, and something within product, or basically just have a couple, chats about maybe the sales process or maybe your sales pipeline or something like that, and how they can help. So that's basically what the platform team does at RBCx. That's basically their day-to-day. So who am I? You know, the little talking head in the window right now. So Laith, I said earlier, Director Ecosystem Engagement. Previously, I used to do early stage at SVB Canada. This was way back when. I helped build out their entire portfolio of like partnerships and relationships with all the various incubators and accelerators. And I used to meet with many, 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 many early stage companies. And that was essentially my jam. So everything that was pre-Series A. I was a senior analyst at Scale Up Ventures, downtown Toronto VC fund here in Toronto. We used to look at a lot of marketplace B2B SaaS, small SMB software companies, a little bit of health tech, a little bit of fintech as well. But mostly it was marketplaces and SMB SaaS was what the partner that I reported to, Matt Roberts, that's what he used to sort of look at. And then I also built the entire capital platform at the time at the DMZ. So it was connecting founder and funder and basically making sure that connection went well. And it primarily was predicated on the fact that you need to educate the founder as much as you can so that you can arm them with the tools, the knowledge, and the resources that they need so that when they do engage with the investors, the outcome is more positive and hopefully in favor of the founder, so that they don't get the runaround or they don't get sort of like misled by any VCs. So I did a bunch of office hours, I did a bunch of webinars. We did the whole cataloging of tracking like how many raised seed, would then go on to raise Series A, et cetera, et cetera. Two truths and a lie. I've used these in old slides and in old presentations. I think it's like a really fun game. So I may have lived in 5 countries. I may have been an extra in a movie, and my likeness may have been used in a video game. So if you want to try and answer those questions or not, if you just want to completely ignore this and let this just fade into the ether, up to you. If you want to try and answer it later on in Q&A, you can. And if you want me to reveal the answer later, I can. But yeah, I usually just use that in there as sort of like as a funny little icebreaker. Anyways, we're going to talk about venture capital. We're going to try to understand it. We're going to talk about the fun part of fund economics. And then we're going to focus a little bit on storytelling and narrative. We're going to talk about pitching, product, and growth. We're going to do a little bit of a wrap-up and Q&A. So getting started, what even is venture capital? It's a very interesting question. It's a very simple question, but it's basically this graph on the right and these bullet points on the left. Obviously, the first couple points, I want to say it's primarily a game of anomalies. So the idea here is that VCs are investing in a portfolio or a basket of companies. And the idea is that they're trying to make the best selections so that this basket of companies ends up performing really well and then returning their fund. We'll talk about that in a second. But the idea is that it truly is anomalies. Statistically, not all selections are going to go well. Some are going to go really well for them. Some are going to go fine. Some are really not going to go well at all, and they're probably going to shut down anyways. But that's the probability of venture capital. There's a lot of risk involved. Like the entire thing has risk built into the model. It's known usually as adolescent money. The reason why it's known as adolescent money is that this is usually capital that you are taking from investors before you're taking any sort of structured loans from a bank, because the risk is extremely high and it is also unusual, right? So if a startup today goes to a bank, doesn't really have that, I guess, like a coherent or any sort of, I guess, like recurring revenues or any sort of like proper financials, the bank needs to account for some risk in some form. And if they were to do that, they would probably charge you an insane amount of interest to sort of cover their tracks and sort of cover risk. You kind of used to see that in the early days of tech, like in early days, like tech at Canada, like I think like in the early or like in the mid 2010s, like 2016, 2015, and 2017, the BDC had a vehicle where they were doing the BDC sort of, I think it was the BDC loan. But the interest on it was quite high. It was actually in the double digits almost, or if not in the double digits at some point. And that was a way for them to sort of hedge their bets and just sort of cover themselves in case the company went under. There was also the highly controversial, I think, like personal guarantee clause that was somewhere in there. I had never seen it exercised, but then I've actually run into a couple founders that were like, oh no, that's something that may have happened to them in the past and ran into a bunch of complications, but it's a thing that could happen. So it's adolescent money. This is money that you're taking from investors, from private investors. This is before you go to any FI and you're taking a full sort of structured loan, essentially, or a sort of a debt vehicle. It's short term. You don't really see venture capital really lasts that long. I mean, it's 7 to 10 years of the company life cycle. There's usually like a couple of rounds until it, a company hits IPO, and then that's it. They kind of go back to another early stage company, and then they're kind of cycling their money into the next investment. In the graph, it's sort of simplified, so you can see a first, second, and third, and then sort of a mezzanine round. We can talk about those sort of in detail. It is high momentum. So VC money tends to look for very short-term, extremely high growth. So if you were to look at that sort of slope of graph, the steeper that slope, the better it is for them, because your revenues will probably shoot up really, really high. Hence your valuation will grow really, really, really fast. And that's actually really good for them to exit this investment, get money returns, and then pour it into the next sort of investment. They're looking for pre-saturation. So if you're ever looking at those industry S curves, they're looking at that point where there's a lot of a specific type of company trying to take over a specific niche. So those products, those companies, those solutions are usually homogeneous or homogeneous in nature, maybe. There's like a lot of similarities to them, but that's where they're betting on the team. And that's the team that's basically going to capture the majority of the niche. Or the majority of the market, and then become that, that 800-pound gorilla that they talk about a lot in VC lingo. It's characterized by high competition, but again, it's to maximize returns, right? It's the slope of the graph plus the depth of the actual slope, and you can actually see it in a very short amount of time. That's what they're actually trying to look for. We talked about the basket. This is one of the easiest slides I try to talk about with venture capital. So like if you were to imagine or sort of visualize a basket, it's a game of anomalies and it's a game of probabilities. They're trying to select for rock stars, but over time, literature has found that in a basket of 10 companies or in a portfolio of 10 companies, you'll find maybe 1 or 2 companies that essentially return the fund and then some that do really, really well. We'll call them rock stars. You'll have a couple companies that do fine, they'll do okay. They'll return maybe 1x, 2x, 3x, or 2.5x, 1 to 2x, I want to say, like the fund, or like their investment, I want to say, sorry. Those are okay. Those usually turn into what is known as lifestyle companies. And the third is essentially they kind of fail. They're essentially write-offs where these companies really don't return anything. It's between 0 and 1x, and that's not really great. And you might be thinking, well, 0 to 1x, there's a 1x return. Why is that a failure? Inflation. That's essentially, to simplify it. If an investor, I'm just going to use Valen because he's on the side of my screen. So if Valen has a fund and he raises $100 million to go invest in his money, to go invest this money in companies, and at the end of the 7 to 10 year life cycle, he comes back and he's made exactly 100 million. So exactly the same amount that he left with. Essentially, that's now worth less because of inflation. So he's technically actually lost money for VCs, for his LPs, for his limited partners. These are the people that would invest in Valen and allow him to go and make more investments. So 1x is usually not a very good thing for VCs to actually attain. So most of the time they're aiming for the 10x or the 100x. And as a result, you can see how selective VCs can actually get over time or throughout the year. So you'd have a fund, maybe 100 million or 50 million plus, let's say. They're extremely selective on like how many investments they do a year, whether that be maybe 2 investments or 3 investments or maybe at most 5. But these 5 investments, these 3 investments are usually characterized with massive checks. And there's a whole lot of betting that these are the companies that are now going to grow and return 10x the amount of money that they've been invested in. So why do we talk about how much they're investing in and how much Valen's gone and raised from his limited partners? It's fund economics, basically. This isn't really fun, but it is actually worth noticing or worth noting just because this is the other side of the table and how the other side of the table tends to think when it comes to funding. So when it comes to, when it comes to any sort of fund, there's something called, the carried interest, there's the management fees, there's the different partners and like what they do and where they get the money from and all that sort of stuff. Before I dive into this, I'm just going to say you have a fund, it has partners. These partners are either putting their own money in, so that would make them a general partner, right? They pay to play. And these partners also go and raise from various, what is known as limited partners, LPs. So these would be either pension funds, these would be these would be corporate venture capitals, these would be fund of funds like the BDC, like Kensington Capital, or extremely high net worth individuals. And at the end of it, when you close out your fund, when you've raised enough capital and you say, hey, we've put a target, we raised a fund of 50 million, this money now represents the money that you need to return to those LPs, so everybody you've raised from. So VCs are just like you, the founder. They go and raise money too. Unlike you, after 7 to 10 years, they need to return that money to those investors and also show that return. Part of this fund that they actually raise goes into the management fees and the carried interest. Carried interest being that, hey, you know what, if we have a portfolio company that exits, that sells, where we sell off the investment for a massive return, we get part of that payout, which is really great for principals and above usually. And then management fees is basically just to keep the lights on, so it's the admin stuff. So I'm paying for furniture, I'm paying for my lights, I'm paying for my internet connection, my computers, my filing, my subscription, services, et cetera, that I need to actually run my funding office. To give you a quick example, so you've got two funds, both 100 million. One returns 1.5 times its fund. So it returns, or it tries to return, so it tries to return 1.5 its amount, basically. And the other returns 3x. And you can kind of see at the bottom, it's the payout. I'll go over this like in detail later, like if someone really wants to talk about it, but essentially eyes on way at the bottom. So that final row where how much is actually paid out to LPs and GPs. So you actually have, this much money goes to LPs, which is characterized by the 80-20 rule. So any sort of money that you make at the end, when you're actually paying out your fund, 80% of that money goes to your LPs. So it goes back to the pension funds, it goes back to the corporates, it goes back to the high net worth individuals, et cetera. And then the GPs that actually paid in to be part of this fund, they make 20%. So that's basically their incentive to do well. That's actually everybody's incentive to do well. Whereas you're returning 1 to 1.5 times your fund, you're not really returning much, and the payout is 0. Usually that means your fund hasn't really done well at all, and the prospects of you raising a future fund is now slim, because that just means you're not very good at finding the best deals and making the best returns for them. And you can imagine, so this is for 100 million sort of sized fund. It gets much more complex when you have multiple funds, and those funds are actually at larger sizes. So we did this map. I think this map was used earlier in some older RBCx presentations, so it may have changed between who has newer funds and who's raised sort of more. But as fund sizes increase, you tend to see they start writing larger and larger checks. But the idea is that a $200 million fund can't really write a $500,000 check or a $200,000 check. The math just doesn't math. It just doesn't work for them, because they would need that company to grow to such an extent, and they would have to pour more money into it for that to even move the needle for their $200 million fund. It just becomes more and more difficult. So that's why when you're trying to raise as a smaller company or as a younger company, as a pre-seed or a seed, you're not really going after like the $1 billion sort of funds or the $500 million funds. You're looking for the micro funds, sort of the 20 million to the 60 million, or 20 million to like maybe the 80 million funds, where their allocation towards pre-seed and seed are actually smaller checks, and checks that would make sense for you and them actually. And they are much more open to write sort of those checks for you. So there's a very good question of why should I care about all this, and why should I understand any of this, and why should I listen to Laith as he's rambling about VCs and he's talking about the $100 million fund that Fallon has and all these different returns or anything. Well, the interesting thing is the current climate is really sort of difficult right now. There's a lot of different things that are happening right now that you should know. So there's been a steady decline of companies that have been incorporating for the past 10-ish years almost, right? There's gaps in early stage financing. High interest rates have also made it more attractive for investors to put their money in GICs instead, and in other investment vehicles, which has sort of slimmed down the amount of capital that's been, that's been raised. There's mismatch of valuation. There's a flight to quality and upstream movement for better ROI. So that was the big one that I talked about, the return on investment. That number 6, I want to say, general decline of VC funding. That one is a pretty big one, as we'll see in a bit. And VCs are also having a hard time raising right now. So any new emerging managers or new funds are having a hard time to close, except some of the larger funds that have like the proven track record. So like I think Inovia's just raised a new round, and they've actually like carved out a small sort of like pocket for seed investments, et cetera, which is, I think, fantastic news for the ecosystem, but that's still difficult times ahead. We've seen flatter valuations, and then investor signaling has been on off for the past sort of couple quarters. And then we also still have the problem of bad actors that pop in, every once in a while. If I were to summarize this as an image, I'd probably characterize it as this, which actually we saw from the CVCA in their most latest report. Yes, the line seems to be flattening out a little bit, but it's been going down since, if you really want to get technical about it, Q2 2021. If you kind of just like draw like a regression, like a what is it? I think it's called a regression line, like through like a trend line, which is not great, but that also means that things are getting tough with how you even pitch to investors, how tough it's getting in front of investors, and what you can actually do when you're actually in front of investors. Which brings me to what kind of storytelling, what kind of narrative, and how can I set myself, so how do these two build or increase the probability of my success? And we talked about it earlier, right? We were talking about focus on fund economics, and we were like, well, why do we care about any of that? Well, it matters because that's the audience at the end of the day. Like when you're in the boardroom with the investors, you're actually pitching to them. So you need to understand who you're pitching to and how they're thinking about things and what's going on in their mind with regards to the overall economic climate. We need to also figure out what kind of decision criteria they kind of go through, right? Do they really focus on sales, or are they sort of a pre-revenue type of VC? And are they looking more for team, or are they looking more for companies that are established in BC versus all of Canada? Or, is this an American VC who invests in Canadian companies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? There is a whole decision framework, and that varies between VC and VC. Unfortunately, I can't give you a magical checklist that covers all VCs because it's very different, as is their deal and risk appetite. So what they kind of look for, or how many deals they do per year. You'll run into some investors that do 20 deals, then you'll run into some investors that run into, or do like 2 or 3. Fund status, fund vintage, that's another thing that founders need to sort of like keep in mind, just because if a fund has been around since mid 2010 and you're talking to them today, they've probably wound up using most of their dry powder, or like most of their net new sort of cash that was that cash that was reserved for net new investments. Sorry. On fund status and vintage, actually, there's a very interesting thing that we're starting to notice from a VC climate or investment climate right now, is that you have a ton of VCs that have now just been sitting tight and not doing a lot of investing for the last couple of years. So they're essentially sitting on a ton of dry powder, and this is dry powder that is being used for net new investments. They haven't moved on it. And their fund life cycles are still continuing, so the time is ticking for them to actually make these investments. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the next 2 years in terms of what happens to valuations and what happens to their appetite of writing a check. And then you also need to know their interests. What drives them? What drives Boris and Angela over at version 1? What drives, Amit Shah and Matt Golden over at, Golden Ventures, or Janet Bannister over at Staircase Ventures? Like what makes them tick? What makes them go yes to this deal or absolutely not to that other deal over there? And again, the narrative is important, and it's basically how you position yourself. This is a super wordy slide, but what I want to focus on over here is the importance of storytelling and vision, and what it really means when you actually want to go pitch to a VC. It's not a fact, it's not about, going and being like, oh, this market is $100 billion, and if we capture only 1% of it, then it's great. That's not really how it works. That's not really attractive. That's not really good for VC. It's more about how do you position yourself as, hey, there is a problem that we are trying to solve in society or in market. We think there is a sizable portion of the population that is willing to pay for this. That portion of the population has the money to pay for this, is willing to pay X price for this, which we can generate Y revenues from. Also, we are the team that's going to beat out all these other Joe Schmoes that are running around trying to do this as well. Right? So why you? Why now? And why is this important? And why do people care? Or why should we care? Right? These are essentially the 3 questions that you should be answering in any pitch. And it's basically, are you going after a large enough problem? You might have found a problem that is really worth solving, but to the overall general populace, that's probably not really worthwhile. Or you'll run into an issue where you'll find a problem, you'll get excited about it, but then you find that people really aren't willing to pay for it, or they'll settle for a simpler, less expensive solution that maybe tackles 5 out of 6 of the problems, and then they'll just deal with the 6th begrudgingly. They'll just put up with it. So it's accounting for all these different things. But again, it's the narratives. It's why is it you? Why is it now? Why is this important? Right? And who is this for at the end of the day? And what does this solve? I want to talk about core narrative elements, right? We're talking about growth. We're always talking about growth. It's the understanding that, growth is exponential. For software companies, I want to say CapEx, OpEx, all that sort of stuff. But the idea is that you want to go right at the bottom, I think is like, that's the most important one, is network effects, sorry, winner take all attitude, where essentially VCs tend to follow what is known as a power law distribution. This was something that was cited in Peter Thiel's book. I highly recommend that book. It's called 0 to 1. And it highlights something called power law distribution, which for Peter and his fund, they had noticed that I think it was 80% of the returns come from your 20% top performers, or your 20% top performers actually generate 80% of your returns. So what happens over time is that VCs start to shift the funds around within their own fund and start doubling and tripling down on the top performers. Right? So you might be invested in by a VC, but if there's another company that's performing better than you, odds are when it comes time for another raise, you're not going to get the money. The other company is probably going to get the money, or the other company is probably going to get more of the money than you do, just because of that power law distribution. So it's something that you need to account for. And again, we talked about this earlier, understanding power law and understanding like your investors. We talked about, it was that little slide with just the 3 different like icons, where it's 6 or 8 companies are going to be written down or written off. That's it. They're gone. They're not really going to do a lot of they're not really going to make the returns for us. 2 or 3 of them will probably make a modest return. Like it's nothing to really write home about. But then it's the 1 or 2 companies that will basically return the entire fund, right? All I need is like 1 Coinbase or 1 Airbnb, and then that's it. It covers all the other investments, whether they're good or bad. It doesn't matter, because I've made all my money back, and then some. you have to understand that investors aren't really afraid of losing money, right? So the idea is that they're trying to increase the number of shots on goal, right? Write-offs are part of their sort of schema, part of their like equation, or part of their decision-making or mental model, whatever term you want to use. But they are, however, and it says this, so I think it says this like right at the bottom. Yeah, there it is. They are, however, deathly afraid of passing on the one or two outlier companies that'll like return the entire fund. And that's the point. The point is, how do you build a company and how do you pitch to the investors that you are one of those two, that you are the outlier and that they should be investing in you versus Joe Schmo that's down the street that is trying to compete with you. These are just some helpful questions and some sort of like, I guess like some sort of like frameworks that you should be sort of like, asking yourselves like as you're building things along or as you're sort of positioning to investors. I don't want to go through question line by line. As housekeeping, just on my end, I'll share this later. I just need to get approval on like the slides themselves, but like this will all be shared. And I'm obviously very much happy to talk to you all about this entire thing, or talk to you about any specific thing in terms of fundraising in general. Just in terms of my experience as a VC looking at deals, and then also my experience as someone who was sending companies to VCs. So we can talk about like this at length, and I'm more than happy to. I just don't want to spend way too much time on it because it's like super wordy. But essentially, it's why is this opportunity compelling? What is the size of market? Who are your competitors? Are you the team that's going to do it? How are you unique? What are your challenges? They don't always have to be like negative challenges either. And then what does the traction look like? Am I getting a sense of momentum or velocity from your company? Or is this a company that just looks like it's running on a treadmill? So it's like effectively not really going anywhere. Those are just some of the questions that you need to ask yourself as you're building and as you're looking to pitch in front of an investor. And I think crucially here, be honest with yourselves, because investors, or at least great investors, will know how to snoop and sniff out those real answers out of you as you go into due diligence with them over time. Again, these are just some metrics, or it's just sort of like yardsticks on like what pre-revenue companies or what revenue generating companies are looking, what investors would look for in both. Again, if you're in pre-revenue, which I've worked with for many years now, it really is about the team. It's about the experience. Are you a previous founder? Do you have industry experience? Like, do you know what you're talking about? Like, you're building a life science company. Are you from life science? Have you worked in automotive? Have you worked in construction? Have you worked in, agriculture? Have you worked in, health? Have you worked in, AI or whatever it is? Or is this just like a shot in the dark? That's not to say anyone who hasn't worked in these industries can't start a company there. It's just a matter of credibility in the very beginnings, in the very beginning, right? Someone coming from that industry, understanding that pain point, having those industry connections, having that experience, knowing the ins and outs, knowing exactly how they need to address the pain points, probably has a better chance than someone who doesn't. And then, do you have any pilots, right? Are people using it and they're not really churning away? Like, do they think that right? Do they think your product is awesome and not terrible? Do they like it? And then on the revenue generation side, there's obviously it's the more focus on like year-over-year growth, and like how things are going in terms of like selling the product, and then basically, how much human touch is actually involved in the process. I think this is the next to last slide that I have, which is just how things and where the emphasis should be on as you're going from pre-seed to sort of, Series B and beyond. Is that I don't really want to spend too much time sort of like reading to you, because I don't want this to be a reading session. But again, like you can kind of see how in the earlier stages, you have more emphasis on team, right? So between pre-seed and seed, it's always about the team. Is this the team that's going to build this? Is this the team that's ready for this? Is this the team that's, geared to take on all these different challenges? Is this the horse that's going to win the race, basically? Because the company and the product and or service is very much the same. It's very much a copy of one another, very few differences, but it's the horse and the rider that's actually the differentiator here, right? And it's how you basically sort of position yourselves to kind of tackle on all these issues. And then when you get to Series A and then beyond, it becomes more about product market fit. Then it becomes more about analysis, and then it becomes a little bit more about team and analysis way later. But that's for a different time. What else can you do after this session? I want to say, speak with your funders if you have any. Try to understand like where you are in terms of ranking, in terms of preference. See if they have like see if you have their support if you're looking to fundraise a new round, because I know times are tough. Speak with lenders if you are able to. If you're on the debt side, or any of the more sort of like complex debt products, etc. You can come talk to us. I mean, Valen's literally right on this call. You can bother him, you can bother me, and we can talk to you all about all the different connections that we can make for you. If you're in a bit of a tough spot, lawyers, always lawyers. People don't think they need to speak to lawyers. That's probably when you do need to speak to lawyers. Understand what your options are. Always work with partners, find pathways to sales, find pathways to success, find pathways to funding. So I'm putting my hand up. You want to talk about fundraising, you want to talk about getting in front of investors, you want to talk about like how you can, approach investors and, do sort of like, reach outs and all that sort of stuff. Like, I'm happy to do it. Always speak with your peers, get like a pulse on what's going on in the street, get a pulse on what's going on in the ecosystem, and then work on a target list. Figure out who your customers and who your investors are, and then focus on the North Star and the KPIs and the metrics. The last two, I want to say, burn rate and runway, those will sneak up on you when you least expect them. Runway, especially because there's lags and delays when it comes to fundraising, but burn rate is something that, unless you can bring it under control, it will become very, very difficult for you to then be able to raise capital, and it'll actually put you in a unfavorable position. But yeah. And that's it. I'm happy to take any questions. I don't know, I can't see the chat window or Q&A, etc., just because I think we're using a different, I think Valen was explaining this earlier, we're using like a enterprise version of Zoom, so I think Angie's going to help with the questions.
Yes, I am here for that. So first, thank you, Laith, for the great presentation and insight on the investor side, which I think at the end of the day, as companies pitching, you need to speak to the person you're talking, like speak to them in that way that they get you, right? So knowing their motivations and their perspective, I think is a pretty critical part of that process. So thank you for all those insights. And yes, I wanted to give another shout out here to Valen too. So Valen is here in Vancouver. If you come to our event on July 2nd, or really I see Valen all over town, honestly. So I'm sure you'll meet Valen if you go to an event one day. Incredible resource, very giving of his time when it comes to supporting startups. And yeah, pleasure to have, working with new ventures as well. So definitely take advantage. So I'll read, there's a few questions coming in. Feel free to add more. This is pretty much your chance to ask an investor anything you like, right? So ask away. So you talked a little bit about this, Laith, earlier, but Kevin was asking about if you have any strategies around fund vintages. Oh, you're muted. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Fund vintages. Yes, that's actually a very good question. So that's something that founders need to take into consideration. So basically, try to get a sense of, so when you're speaking to an investor, they'll usually let you know that they're usually investing out of, I don't know, so I'm just going to use Valen again. I'm going to say, he's got his fund, Valen has Valen Fund 1, right? We're just going to say that just for ease of example. So he's investing out of Fund 1. And Fund 1 was established we're now 2024. Let's say it's 2020. So that's when it was established and it was ready to roll and it was doing investments as of 2020. So back in 2020, when Valen sets up his fund and is now investing, whatever amount of money that he's raised, call it 100 million, usually 2/3 of that is held as what is known as follow-on investment or reserves, right? So about around 66 to 67 million is going to be used to double and triple down on the companies that are doing really well, right? So as they raise capital, you can pour more money into those companies that are doing well and sort of maintain your sort of equity position or maintain a good position or a good enough position so that you can then exit out at a good sort of return on those companies, which means Valen has about 30-ish million, 33, call it 33 million, to invest in new companies. And at that point, it's very much, well, what is Valen's check sizes and how is Valen sort of investing every single year? And we are now in 2024. Does Valen still have any of that $33 million left, right? That's basically a good sort of understanding of like what the vintage is and like how it works. He closed it in 2020, or sorry, he closed it as in like it's now ready to sort of invest in 2020. That means maybe around 2027, 2030 is when he has to go back to his investors and basically return the funds, or basically return his, basically showcase the return on investments. And then he gears up for fund sort of 2, and then fund 3, and then fund 4, etc. So understanding the vintage, i.e. when that fund was established and actually was starting to write checks, is quite important and is quite crucial to know, A, how much money could be left right now, and B, what is the appetite now for new deals, just new deals in general. As you start to approach the end of your fund, more of the money is now used to double and triple and quadruple down on your current investments versus make new ones. And then also what you'll notice with early stage investments or early stage investors is that they'll start to use that leftover money to invest in later stage companies. So they'll slowly move upstream, because those companies can then make quick, easy returns so that they can show their LPs that they're making them more money at that time. So you'll find like a seed investor look at like maybe like a couple more post-seed or maybe like a couple Series A companies, and throw them into the mix.
Interesting. So yeah, how old a fund is, I guess, it actually gives you a lot of
insight. It's a very long-winded way of saying how old the fund is, but it also explains appetite as well.
Awesome. Okay, moving on. So a question from Ashley: what are some good KPIs and metrics to track at the pre-seed stage?
This is an interesting one. So I think HubSpot had like a couple interesting or had like a blog or two about this. This is more so for software companies, unfortunately. That's mostly where sort of my knowledge and sort of experience comes from. But on the software side, you are looking for essentially revenue growth. So those two kind of go hand in hand. Revenue, though, is an output metric. So basically, it is a vanity metric. So that's something that if you've done everything right, it goes into the system, and then out comes revenue as it sort of goes up. You're looking for churn. So the amount of customers that basically unsubscribe or stop paying, or you lose them to a competitor. It's really important to kind of track like what happens on churn. Right? Are they going to a competitor? Are they just like, hey, this isn't worth it, or I think it's too expensive? Like, obviously, tracking reasons for churn is really cool and really, 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 really critical. But I will say this: churn is a very big one. And then CAC and LTV, so customer acquisition cost and lifetime value of the customer. So as churn decreases, as churn decreases and your number of users grow, you'll start to notice that you may have hit a specific niche, or the niche that you were targeting, or that you're getting very close to that niche that you were originally targeting, because you're actually losing less subscribers or less people that are paying for your product and or service. And you're actually increasing in user base size, etc. LTV and CAC for software companies, I think, hovers around 3 to 1. So 3 LTV to 1 CAC. I think that's like the ideal of like where it sort of like levels off. In the very beginning, I think it starts off as a negative because you're actually spending way more to acquire customers, and then it levels off at 1 to 1, and then it becomes 3 to 1. So you're starting to gain, I guess, like 3 customers, more or less 3 customers for every like 1 that you're paying for, but something like that. But CAC, LTV, churn, gross margin, I would say that's another one, and then revenue. Those are the 4 that a lot of investors seem to look at. And then obviously, what are your expenses? Like, what are the expenses? But expenses are also part of the gross margin sort of equation there. So yeah.
Okay, great. Another question around tips on where to find investors for B2C companies.
B2C. So B2C, sadly, there aren't too many of them in Canada. There's very few of them. That's the harsh truth. No real way to sugarcoat it. Most investors in Canada tend to be B2B and software inclined, which means, for my hardware friends on this call, like it's also a pretty like hard thing to do because like not a lot of investors have that expertise or interest to go into hardware or anything that's sort of like B2C. Canadian investors are fairly sort of, set on the types of companies that they fund. You'll find them. It doesn't mean that they don't exist, period. It just means that your options are extremely limited. Off the top of my head, I think there's like maybe 2 different funds that look at B2C. I'm forgetting one of them, but the other one I know I think is Golden looks at a few B2C sort of deals here and there, but that's also primarily not their main focus even. A good way to find investors, it's an inexpensive way, honestly. Crunchbase is probably what I would recommend. Grab like a Crunchbase Pro license. It's not as expensive, or just, free trial or whatever it is. Search out some VCs, build a list from there. You will also sometimes be able to Google some sort of hacked together like VC lists from other people that are looking to raise in North America that will just like list out like all the different VCs. But then you got to roll up your sleeves and start to look for either email contacts and all that sort of stuff. But then that's the fun of list building, and it's essentially the prioritization, filtering out like who you go after first, working on messaging, and then again, why are you compelling? Why is it you? Why are you solving this? Is this a problem worth solving? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Another person was asking kind of a similar question around, but for product investors, that same answer applies. Anything to add on?
Yeah, it's literally this. It's literally the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, there's a follow-on. Armin also asked, I'm not sure what this question, maybe do EOIs and survey results reflect the market interest for pre-seed investors? Sorry, that's me beeping.
I don't know what an what is, I don't know what the acronym is.
Expression of interest, I'm guessing. Okay.
Oh, expression of interest. Like expression of interest is in like, if I'm a founder and I have an expression of interest from like a company to do business with me. EOIs, I want to say similar to LOIs, are treated the same, where these are great, but they're not usually used as the main indicator of a company's like success or growth. It's more, is money in bank? Am I, is money getting paid for this project or product service, or is this contract actually getting sort of paid out? LOIs, EOIs, I'm just going to say, they're good as sort of a like maybe like an initial indicator that like someone's interested in this, but until someone pays for it or someone is showing you that they are willing to pay for it, like as in they're like, all right, I will actually sign a contract with you, but by the end of December 2024, I'm going to pay you $5 million. That's better. But then having the $5 million in the bank is actually way better. But yeah, so any sort of letter or expressal, like they're not the greatest, but they're also not the worst. So they're just, yeah.
All right, cool. Any thoughts on equity crowdfunding for capital raising, particularly in pre-seed rounds or seed?
So we've seen that. I've seen that in the past. I've seen it on platforms like Front Funder, etc. There's no real sort of hate or, hey, don't do this. It's just I haven't really seen. I've not really seen companies that have gone through that sort of, really have that sort of like boom in growth. This is not a knock, and this is not a knock to like anyone who has done crowd sort of equity investments or crowd equity funding. This is more just I have not seen it. and I have not seen it enough to say, hey, this is a good venue for you to actually go after. I'm more of the classical approach where if you're going to raise money, either do a price round or do a safe and then get back to work building your company. And the less technicalities and the less complexities along the way, the better. And I feel it's just a better route for you to get seasoned and get your experience and go talk to more investors as you're going and raising. You're going to get a lot of no's. That's basically a given. But at the same time, it's a lot of experience for you to learn on how, how you present yourself, how you present your company, present your business, present the case, present everything, and then just basically go from there. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, great. Just for those listening, Kevin in the chat's looking to find out what CRM you use. So put that in if you want to give him some thoughts. And then for last question for you, Laith, from Hamid, and I strategically chose this as the last one to wrap up with. This is what stage, so you could look at this as TRL in revenue, not in revenue. But at what stage do you suggest startups get in touch with RBCx?
What stage? So honestly, all stages. I don't think we have a particular stage where, we'll basically say no thanks or turn you away. I think, come talk to us, whenever you want to come talk to us. There's no sort of like, oh, I've made 50,000 in sales this year, I should go talk to Valen. If you've made 0 or 10 or $1 million, go talk to Valen. Talk to me. We're not really stage like focused or stage gated, I want to say. We are stage agnostic. We're again, like we want to be your growth partner. We want to be your champion from, pre-seed all the way to IPO. Other banks will say it. I think we're the ones that actually do it. So there's a big difference there. Yeah, so come talk to us, and whatever it is that we could figure out on how to help you that at that particular stage, we will hammer something out one way or another. And it doesn't necessarily have to be debt. So if you're thinking RBCx, it doesn't need to be, I need loan and I'm too early for loan. It could be, hey, I want to get in touch with you because I want to learn more about fundraising. I want to learn more about capital. I want to learn more about what's going on in ecosystem, or I want to get into this program, or I need a referral to this, or can you introduce me to so-and-so? We really are aiming to be like the one-stop shop and like, again, like your ecosystem partner, your growth partner, your champion.
Great. So yeah, so it doesn't necessarily they don't necessarily have to be in revenue. Potentially you can't have everything, but you definitely can engage anytime.
Yes, correct.
All right. Awesome. All right. Well, let's wrap it there. I think that's a good place to wrap it. So Laith, thank you for taking the time again to share your insights and analysis on the VC side of things. Valen from RBCx, thank you for making this all happen. Thanks everyone for joining. We will post the recording probably in a day or so. And that's it. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks again, Laith. Thanks again, Valen. Bye, everyone.
Bye.